Hi, Robert. It's lovely to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
I spent some time with you in the women's group doing some shadow work. And I want to introduce you to my audience, my audience who watch my little Conscious Money YouTube channel. You are an integral psychotherapist, and you've written 13 books, and you are quite a big deal, and you've said yes to me interviewing you, so I'm really grateful. I wanted to start off by asking you, have you in your shadow work identified how money shows up in people's stuff?
It shows up in a lot of different ways. I mean, it shows up when I'm around emotions like fear, shame, aggression. It's like, to me, money itself is neutral, but what we do with it is not necessarily neutral. There's so much we can do with it. How much do we have? We can take a quantitative approach, which many people do. What's enough? Or my approach is more qualitative. I'm looking at the quality of it. Like, I could, for example, could be doing poorly financially and be happy. I could be doing great financially and be miserable. I've seen many people who are wealthy be miserable with it. People who are much worse off handling it better. So there's so much to be said around how we relate to it. My whole focus is the relationship. If I'm working with couples and there's money issues, there usually are, look at the relationship to it, not just the nuts and bolts and the amount, but like, what does it mean to you? What is enough? It's a good question. What is enough?
You wouldn't need people like me if people knew the answers to that.
It's crazy. I mean, it's interesting. We can be in a certain mood around money and feel like, oh my God, and we're shaky, we're insecure. Our mood shifts. We feel happy about something else. And we look at money and go, well, that's okay. I trust. I mean, maybe things are a little low now. I'm an entrepreneur, or I got a windfall, or I got a huge disappointment, huge tax bill. What do I do? How do I deal with how this makes me feel? That's so important.
I like what you said also about relationship, because you focus on and stress on that in your work. It's not good enough to become very conscious and become very aware. You also have to focus on the connections and intimacy in your intimate relationships, and just describing money as a relationship. Like, some people have this avoidance, for some people, it's like...
Well, I look at what couples have the hardest time talking about.
Yeah.
Sometimes in couples work, with the topic of sex can be difficult to work with, but it's workable. Religion, spirituality, God, more so. But money's often the most uncomfortable topic. Many couples don't have a clue what the other person's income is, where their money's going. I say, if you're going to get closer, you have to also bring your financial considerations into the picture too, and look at how it makes you feel, look at what it brings up in you, and not use it as a bone of contention between you, but as here's an opportunity to grow further by examining each of our relationship to money, like when we were children. If we grew up in poverty, it's a very different life than if we grew up taken care of that way. Like many people whose parents grew up in the Great Depression, they could have millions now, and they're still penny pinching in a way that's not healthy whatsoever, because it's like the depression is still lurking around the corner in their mind somewhere.
Yeah, and there's so much of focus on epigenetic research, and maybe it's there in the body and the field of the family. And how much can shadow work move the relationship with money to a more functional relationship with just the individual? Or do you think more work needs to be done?
Hugely. If the person does real shadow work, doesn't mean reading about it only, studying archetypes, keeping it intellectual, but getting down into it, because real shadow work has to do with our conditioning. Like, our shadow is the kind of an internal container for all the things in ourselves we've repressed, said that's not me, disowned. So there's a lot there, and what's mainly there is our unresolved conditioning. And we all have conditioning. So are we facing it? Are we awakening to it? Are we bringing it out of the dark? Money is just one of many things that will be brought out of the dark, and will change our relationship to everything. But also implicit in this is collective shadow. Like, we're affected by how not just we're doing with money, but our family, our friends, our culture, our country even. How's it going? And the world's, it's just obviously pretty shaky right now in a lot of ways. The markets, everything. There's always an inherent insecurity around money. That's what I found. There's always an inherent insecurity. But if we work with that insecurity, to the point where we realize that life itself is inherently insecure. Suddenly, money is not such a big deal. It's just part of the dance. If we're secure in our insecurity, that means we're embracing our insecurity, taking care of it. It's not a problem. We adopt a non-problematic orientation toward our insecurity. Then it doesn't really matter how much or how little money we have. It does in a certain sense, I know, but in a bigger sense, it doesn't matter. It's like, what are we doing with it? How are we handling our $100 or $1 million? What are we doing with it?
And the collective shadow, what you said, do you think it has quite a lot to do with the disintegration of the earth that we're witnessing also?
Yeah, we have to also do it together. The individual shadow work is really important. It's also important to have some sense of we're in it together. We're at a crisis as a species. What are we doing? Burying our heads in the sand, distracting ourselves, making excuses to our children as to why we haven't taken a stronger stand on what's going on with the planet right now. There's a lot to be said.
Eckhart Tolle talks about not collective shadows, but because you also talk about spiritual bypassing. And there's a teacher I like, a spiritual teacher called Jack O'Keefe. And she did a talk at the SAND conference. I think it's Spirituality, Science and Non-Duality conference. And she used a phrase called financial bypassing. And I think sometimes spiritual teachers have also maybe not completely done their shadow work. They might be awakened or had an awakening experience or a series of them, but you can still see the clinging and the attachment or some sort of not.
Yes, most haven't done the work because a lot of spiritual paths downplay the importance of psychotherapy, make anger wrong, get anger phobic, indulge in what I call blind compassion, where we don't take firm stance, and they're escaping life in the raw, emotional problems, relationship hassles. And if that's going on, of course, they'll be bypassing in many areas, intellectual bypassing, financial bypassing. It's basically an avoidance of what's right here. So the really hard work, and this is hard work, and you saw it in the group with me, is everyone has pain, suffering. So the question is, what are we doing with it? And my huge intuition for the last 2-3 decades is that we need to turn toward what's painful. Not too fast or it will be too much for us, but we turn toward could be a stubbed toe, could be some jealousy, it could be a loss of a relationship, it could be someone's death. We turn toward the pain of it, we feel it, and then we can metabolize it, we can digest it. It'll move through us, but if we can't metabolize it like that, if we're distracting ourselves from it. So it's a very simple first step. There's pain, turn toward it. Seems counterintuitive at first, then you move toward it. And the closer you are to it, the more clearly you can see it. You can bring it into focus. Then you can work with it. But if you're running away from it, you won't. So this is an act of great courage for every one of us because we're afraid to do it. It's scary, but we take a tiny, tiny baby steps toward it and we go, oh my God, it's not that bad. And then the fear mutates, it expands, it shifts into anger, maybe lust, some sort of expansion. And we realize fear does not have to be taken as some sort of demon or dragon. It's unpleasant, but part of our work is to be okay with being with things that are unpleasant, like being okay with the sensation of not being okay. And you saw in your group, the women's group, that when the women turned toward what was painful, with me guiding them and them doing their part, usually it was a good result. They go, there's more freedom. There's a healthier catharsis. There's a release. And at that point, if they were to look at their money situation, they probably would not be freaking out, even if their income was low. They go, I'm alive. I'm here. I'm grateful to still be here. Yeah, I could use more money, but I'm not. That attitude is so important to cultivate, not as a way of bypassing our feelings, but just to reach into ourselves where we're okay with not being okay. We're okay with being mortal. We're not saying it's okay, awful things are going on. Of course, we take stands over that. We take stands against abuse, etc., different types of violence, but we don't do it from a righteous, aggressive place. We do it from a cleaner place in ourselves where we still have some compassion for everyone, even if we have to kick ass, because there's such a thing as fierce compassion, where we don't just politely try and be kind to someone. We may challenge them quite strongly, but we haven't forgotten They're human. We haven't dehumanized them. And a lot of the problems with how people handle and deal with money, there's a dehumanization. People just assume their self-worth. They equate their self-worth with their net financial worth. You go, what? They're so different, but they get conflated easily.
And they conflate success with
Yeah.
material numbers. And then again, that insecurity trigger can keep people constantly hoarding or becoming workaholics or compulsive workers and never spending. Yeah. How does one look for where one needs to do shadow work in the wounds of our childhood? But like, how does one find clues? Because it's shadow. I can't see what I'm avoiding.
Well, here's one big clue is reactivity, which I define as activated shadow material. And any one of us, you, me, everyone, when you're reactive, shadow materials surfacing, but of course we don't recognize it as such. We just think we're right. But if someone asked us, how old do you feel right now? And we were honest, we'd probably say 4 years old, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10, 11, much younger than we are now. That's the old wound kicking in. So it's really important to know one's history, not just intellectually, but to be able to feel like, here's what happened. We're not blaming our parents for where we're at now, but we're seeing the impact that sloppy parenting or even bad parenting had on us, or trouble with siblings or teachers or other kids or different events. We're all conditioned. Some people have very pleasant childhoods, but they're conditioned to be nice. They're out of touch with their anger, their raw feeling. They're a little numb. Any one of us, a lot of us others of us have really terrible childhoods, which are more obviously bad. And the good news is it's all workable. It's workable. Instead of trying to get more money so we feel better, we become more in touch with who we are. Then the money is handled. And it's ironically at those times, I think money flows more easily for people and they're not worried about it. Even if they can justify the worry, say for a single mother, doesn't have enough food on the table. I get that. I have compassion for that. There's a way to be with it that makes our life less stressful.
Feeling relaxed, trusting life to take care of us, of course, doing our part. And there's also sometimes I see a resilience, a sense of buoyancy, a sense of confidence about, I'll be okay. I'll figure it out. I don't want to trivialize it, but I feel that very strongly. I feel like I'll be okay no matter what. Life takes care of me and always has. Doesn't mean everything goes my way. Things still go dramatically wrong. But there's this very strong trust and faith.
Well, there's a radical acceptance implicit in that. Not where you say it's okay that terrible things are happening, but where you accept that here's the situation, here's my response, there's an acceptance of that. Then you can take action. Otherwise, we get paralyzed with fear. We get numb. We get cut off. And we make having more money too important.
Because one thing I admired working with you, Robert, was how you held boundaries. You were very intimate with us in the group space, but everybody got a certain amount of time. And you managed to keep yourself not too immersed so that you could stay present, but not losing yourself, it felt like you were very stable and centered in yourself.
Yeah, what you're pointing at is the shadow side of empathy. Let me say it again. What you're pointing at is the shadow side of empathy. We get too involved in another person emotionally, and then we're of no use to them or ourselves because we're lost in their reality. We've lost touch with us. So I teach in the trainings I do, especially the cultivation of what I call lucid empathy, where you feel the other person, you're in close, you're quite intimate with the details of what they're sharing, but you keep a subtle distance, so you keep them in focus. And this is also personal work where we look at our fear, our anger, our shame, where we up close, but not so close that we get swamped by it. We still can operate skillfully. So there's a very subtle boundary implicit in that. It's a permeable membrane of sorts, a psychospiritual membrane. But it's there, and it's there for me all the time. I've been doing this for so many decades. Every therapist I train has to learn how to stand apart from what they're doing with a person without being too far back. We're too far back. We're lost in objectivity, apparent objectivity. We can't see what's going on. We're in too close. We sympathize. We feel the person, but we overdo it. Then we get invested in a certain outcome. Maybe it's not right for that person to have to cry hard or do some catharsis. Other times it is. But if we're in too close, we'll lose our sense of perspective. And this goes back to money again, where it's so easy to lose one's perspective because suddenly you've got a couple of weeks with no work, something happens, you can't do this, you can't do that. Oh my God. And there's a sense then of, oh, no one's going to take care of me. Maybe no one will, but even that, you can take care of yourself. Like the extreme for me, I remember being in India in the early 70s and seeing, I was in Benares, Varanasi, seeing people's, the bodies, the burning, the guts, the whole thing. And I saw a lot of joy in the eyes of people that had leprosy. They were rotting. They were dying. No one knew who they were. They weren't famous, hadn't written books or anything. And they had something in their eyes that was very touching. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because they were looking forward to their death. They had a religious faith about that. But they were at ease. That struck me. I was a young man then. I thought, wow, this is really touching. And here I am worrying about not having quite enough money to make my exit from India to another country. A problem, but a very tiny one compared to what I was seeing.
What advice would you give to people to have healthier boundaries with money? Like, some people just can't say no. They can't. Family person asks them for money and they just want to be nice.
It shifts from can't say no to won't say no. I won't say no. And see, in that, you already feel a little bit, you have to have your anger on tap. Like if I have good boundaries, I have to have my anger on tap to enforce them. I don't do it very often, but I have to enforce the boundary, say, no, doesn't work for me, stop. There's that. We have to have boundaries. And if our boundaries are trashed or disrespected as children, we'll be drawn to situations that mimic that, where we still are with a partner, lover, some business thing, where our boundaries aren't being respected. And it's familiar to us, and we tend to play the child again. We may complain, but we put up with it. A good relationship always has good boundaries. Both partners have really clear boundaries. They're not rigid. They can open their boundaries to let the other one come in, but it's conscious. It's conscious. It's done with full awareness. So I'd say part of what's important here is to understand what your boundaries are, where they're weak, where they're not, and deepen them. And realize that anger is the emotional guardian of boundaries. If we don't have our anger on tap, we can't say stop or no with enough force to stop the person. We may say it very nicely, oh no, we don't want to hurt their feelings. And they can hear our ambivalence, right? And they will then take advantage of us. So many people have really bad boundaries, weak boundaries. Other people have boundaries that are too rigid, they're too hard, they're thick, they're too defensive. They have to be dismantled, skillfully, but dismantled. So boundaries are important here too. Not treating anger as a problem, because there's unhealthy anger and there's healthy anger. I'm talking here about healthy anger, the anger that doesn't shame, blame, or dehumanize. It just simply says no. With enough emphasis, it gets heard. It's interesting as we talk about money, there's so many other elements come into it.
Yes. Because it's connected to everything in our lives. And I really like Jacob Needleman's books. I don't know if you've read Money and the Meaning of Life, but he says, you've got to deal with money. Okay. Yeah. He considers it quite important in the journey of becoming aware, within yourself. But often it's not like at an early stage awareness, it's not usual for people to look at their relationship with money. It seems like there is an awakening happening now. More and more people want to become aware. And it's being talked about a lot, which is wonderful. Because you do like separate groups, men's groups and women's groups. And as a woman, I must say it felt very safe, you being a man and us talking about quite sometimes intimate and traumatic things. It felt very safe. How would you say that there are different themes because we are culturally conditioned differently between men and women when it comes to money? For example, one of the stereotypes is that the male has to be the provider. The woman must provide more of the emotional labor or the care, for family members. And I was wondering if there are like some particular themes that you see that need more work.
Well, I think women's groups, men's groups, women's groups tend to have more focus on finding voice, finding power, treating anger as a resource. Men too, but men have a lot more work in my men's groups was doing with shame. Women have shame too, but men have a lot of shame because they tie their shame to their competence. And that includes how much money they make or don't make. And a lot of men have enormous shame around that, and they're not working with the shame. They're just trying to avoid it by making more or distracting themselves in different ways. Once a man is faced his shame and sat in it, cleaned it up a little bit, he's less likely to turn the shame into aggression or emotional dissociation. He'll stay more present. And yes, there's a lot of cultural pressure, perhaps more on men. Be the provider, make the money. But that's shifting a lot. I see a lot of women who are in the provider position more than the man they're with. It's just increasing over the last decade or so.
Yeah, and more women stepping into their power and not being afraid of that power, and more women liberating their voice. And yes, I also like how you focus on the sensitivity of men, because it feels like there are less spaces for men to feel their full range of feelings and not have any reaction from, other people.
Well, when I see the men in my men's groups, they're usually extremely relieved after the first hour or so, because it's a very safe space. Not because I say so, it just is. It becomes that, like in your women's group, and they can unburden themselves. I see that men cry just as much as the women, including the tough guys. And once they crack and they go, I can talk about this, I can talk. Another topic we have in the men's groups, women don't have to hear, is about porn. A lot of men have very heavy porn habits or had them. We talk about that. We explore it. We explore the wounding that drove it to them drove them to it in the first place. And there's such a sense of brotherhood after a while. I can talk. I can be free. So there are more spaces, but there's less men going for it. I was saying to Diane, my wife, I said, it's interesting. The last couple of months, I had so many women coming for work and so few men. A few times before, it's been more men than women, but men are a little shyer about it. There's a little more pride. I don't need therapy. That's just their shame talking. They need it just as much as women or more.
Well, I hope people can get to one of your group works. I really like group work for shadow work, because there's so much that you get from the experience of being in a group that when you're one-on-one therapy, I don't know, sometimes it's a bit intense and you can learn from other people's stuff, or when you get triggered by other people's stuff and you're like, oh, what's that about?
Well, I saw that. I see that in every group after a while. Everyone is very interested in everyone else's work. It's not like, oh, it's boring, I got to wait my turn. No, it's more, that's me. I'm in there too. It's different, but you did that for me. You spoke for me. It's shared. It's like a little community that forms for 3 days or a week if it's a training. Then it dissipates. Like, I don't know if you're staying in touch with the other women.
We are.
Yeah, but some groups do that. Other groups don't. But there's a sense, look what we did together. In 3 days, we formed a little community. And we saw each other's rawest wounds and saw the edge being played. And we now have the freedom to talk. We can share. It doesn't have to always be deep, but we can do that now. And when there's more of that sense of community, the money becomes less of a worry, I think, because there's a sense we're in it together. Not that we have to give each other our money, but there's a sense we're in it together. It's just one aspect of our being that's been neglected or kept in the dark a little bit.
Wow. I'm really touched to hear about your work, especially the men's work. And I think I think the shadow work is so important, with people's relationship with money. So I hope people don't just read their books, but pay attention to their triggers and find like a workshop, if not yours, and someone's workshop, a money workshop or a shadow workshop.
And I'm still doing individual work.
Yes.
I quit it 5 years ago. I started it again when COVID kicked in. I'm still doing it. So my preference is groups trainings. I love that. And I still am doing individual work. So if people want to see me, it's 45 minutes, to cover a lot of ground in a short time.
Well, keep up the good work, Robert. And I might see you again in one of your groups. Thank you so much for your time.